Welcome everyone to another episode of Tutorial Tuesday. It is week 16, 2020. Thank you for tuning in. And it's probably day 6,725 of self-quarantine or self-isolation, however you see it with this pandemic going on. But hey, you're in the right place. We're going to get some tutorials going today. We're also going to address a couple questions from last week that I wasn't able to get to. So let's get right into your questions. Ty, thanks for the comedy and thanks for tuning in, brother. I appreciate it. Yeah, so the beard still grows every week, and absolutely, I'm still feeling the flow of it. And until I have too many shots of tequila, or unless I get bored, it won't be going anywhere anytime too soon. Thanks for asking, brother. Thanks for the questions on the colors. The number one thing is it depends on the picture. And number two, primarily what I'm doing is I'm going to the HSL section in Lightroom. That's a hue, saturation, and luminance, and I'll work with those on a varying basis. There is a little vibrance that's added. I would say no more than 10 to 15 points, but primarily everything is done through hue, saturation, and luminance in Lightroom. Thank you for the question. Emily, thank you. You and your family are so special to me and to us, and it's been such a pleasure over the years watching your family grow from having your first child to having your third child and everything in between. So thank you, friend. I look forward to many more years to come. Thank you very much for the compliment. I appreciate you tuning in and taking the time to send this. We're doing our best out here and hope you're safe as well. You're very welcome. Thank you for tuning in and thank you for participating, because without your participation, Tutorial Tuesdays don't exist, and we're in our second year, so we must be doing pretty good. So thank you. Let's get to that question. Great question. Thank you for asking. So I use what I call floating my focal point, and that is one single focal point that I move around the 61 points available to me to achieve that focus. So let's talk real quick about what I mean by floating my focal point. So first, on the back of the Canon camera, what I'm going to do is enable the focal points by clicking here. That brings up this screen right there. And from there, now that I've enabled the focal points, what I can do is use the multifunction button here to scroll through the different focal options like zone and single point and things like that. Again, just to reiterate, I'm pushing this button back here to enable them. Now I'm using the multifunction button to scroll through the different variations that I have. I rest on that single point primarily. Okay, now I'm using that single point, and I can use that top rocker and this back wheel to move, as you can see, that focus point either horizontal or vertical and put it on my subject. Now you might ask yourself, you actually move it around through those zone areas all the time? Yes, I do. And if you've ever been to my workshop, anybody can attest. I show you exactly how I do that and how I choose a dynamic composition. The second part of this question relates to, do I explore different options of focusing, like the zones where you can break up a third of the viewfinder to focus over here or in the middle or over here? Yes, I do that too sometimes. This is a very deep question and one that can go in many different directions. The one big thing, and I wouldn't really even call it a goal, but the one thing that continues to drive me is documenting the relationships in ranch life, in people. It's those relationships that drive me, whether that be the relationship between the rider and the horse, or the rider and their dogs and the horses, or the family relationships. That at the core is what drives me. The payoff for me, or if you could say I achieve a goal, it's when I get to document those relationships in such a way that they are celebrated, like in Western Horseman or AQHA or something like that. I would say a vast majority of my body of work includes those relationships, whether that be somebody's daughter or son graduating from high school and doing their senior pictures, or a father taking his 2-year-old up on the saddle. Thanks so much for the question. I have a Canon 5D Mark IV and a Canon 5D Mark III. I pair those up with Canon's L-series lenses, the 16-35 f2.8 and the 70-200 f2.8 as well. The obvious answer to this one is yes, absolutely. In fact, Why don't we start one next Wednesday? We'll call it Western Wednesday, and I'll throw out some voting topics to host the class on. So look for that tomorrow. The two that I use the most, and I've purchased a bundle of these, but the two I use the most are number one, DxO. It's their Nik collection, silver, analog, and color effects. And number two is the Alien Skin. Check those out. This is an in-depth question here, and I believe that the point of this question really is to talk more about the ethics in use of our images and Photoshop and how we interact with those. So let's talk about that. When I talk ethics in photography and in the use of Photoshop, I draw the line when we significantly make changes to someone's body or their face or something like that, like removal of moles and scars without being asked. In the Western world, we can see this as altering sale catalog pictures of horses and bulls and things like that. That is a no-go. You know, that's just false advertising all the way around. Past my ethics disclaimer on Photoshop and your images, what I would tell you is use Photoshop to your best potential. And you're constantly going to be learning over and over. And if you want to add clouds to a picture, try it. On the flip side of that argument, of course, is adding textures to an image going too far, or is removal of light poles in an image going too far because they're distracting? You have to counterbalance, you have to balance everything out. I'll add this to it. As a photography judge for many years, we actually have categories where we encourage photo manipulation where there's multiple composites or digital painting and stuff like that. At the end of the day, I think this all comes down to personal taste. In the beginning, when I started shooting, I felt like I had to be that traditional photographer where I took the picture and that was it. But the truth is, there's so much more to it than that. Legitimate question here. How do you keep dust? How do you keep your stuff clean out at brandings? Because obviously we know it's a dirty environment. Now, I'm going to talk about it for just a minute, and then I'll link you to a blog post that I wrote about it. The reality is we're in a dirty environment, and the reality also is that you're not going to keep dust off of your equipment. There is going to be some sensor dust. There's going to be dust all over your equipment. Now, there are a couple ways that I go about. First and foremost, out on location at a branding, I do not change lenses while branding is happening. I have two separate camera bodies and two lenses attached to those, and those do not come off until I get home. Once I'm home, then what I do is use one of those compressed air cans to blow off my camera and blow off the lens. Once the dust has settled, metaphorically speaking, then I disconnect those. What I see a lot of people doing is this. They keep their camera with the sensor facing up, and gravity pushes that dust down in the sensor. I don't recommend that at all. In fact, turn it upside down, connect. And the second most important thing to me in keeping my equipment clean is sending it in to Canon Professional Services. They've never let me down. I usually send it in once or twice a year. How do you really put yourself out there and gain photography clients? There's two things that come to mind. Number one, bust your ass. You have to persevere and you have to bust your butt out there. You can't stop networking. And that's number two. I don't have a magic bullet for people getting photography clients, but what I do have is a decade plus experience of putting myself out there and getting clients. And that's a perseverance part of it. And a lot of people won't do that. That's where a lot of people fail. So for the everyday photographer, what does this look like? To me, as an everyday photographer, what that looks like is I go to a branding and somebody has a child that's a senior. They don't have their pictures done. You know what? I can do those. Now, what about those people that want to go out and they want to do fashion photography for small clothing boutiques? You got to reach out. In other words, you got to email them. You got to stop in and talk to them and tell them that you're available for hire. Now, when I started out, look, I'm not afraid to take shitty jobs, especially if I can network from those. And those built clientele for me. You know what? They got the pictures. They shared them. I went on to another job. And if you think that I'm wrong about you going out and doing a shoot for free, then take, for example, all these big companies like Yeti and Bison Union sending all their product out for free and getting people to post about it. What do you think they're doing? Finally, on this point, hustle, hustle, hustle. You need to listen to the Small Business Roundup, Episode 7 and Episode 8. Swipe over to take a listen to those.